Book 3, Chapter 4 of the Lancashire Witches. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Andy Minter. The Lancashire Witches, A Romance of Pendle Forest, by William Harrison Ainsworth. Book 3, Houghton Tower. Chapter 4 The Gorge of Cliviger. The sun had already set as Nicholas Assheton reached Todmorden, then a very small village indeed, and alighting at a little inn near the church, found the ale so good, and so many boon companions assembled to discuss it, that he would fain have tarried with them for an hour or so; but prudence for once getting the better of inclination, and suggesting that he had 15 or 16 miles still to ride, over a rough and lonely road, part of which lay through the Gorge of Cliviger, a long and solitary pass among the English Apennines, and moreover had a large sum of money about him, he tore himself away by a great effort. On quitting the smiling valley of Todmorden, and drawing near the dangerous defile before mentioned, some misgivings crossed him, and he almost reproached himself with foolhardiness in venturing within it at such an hour, and wholly unattended. Several recent cases of robbery, some of them attended by murder, had occurred within the pass, and these now occurred so forcibly to the squire, that he was half inclined to ride back to Todmorden, and engage 2 or 3 of the topers he had left at the inn to serve him as an escort as far as Burnley; but he dismissed the idea almost as soon as formed, and casting one look at the green and woody slopes around him, struck spurs into Robin, and dashed into the gorge. On the right towered a precipice, on the bare crest of which stood a heap of stones, piled like a column, the remains probably of a cairn. On this commanding point Nicholas perceived a female figure, dilated to gigantic proportions against the sky, who, as far as he could distinguish, seemed watching him, and making signs to him, apparently to go back; but he paid little regard to them, and soon afterwards lost sight of her. Precipitous and almost inaccessible rocks, of every variety of form and hue, some springing perpendicularly up like the spire of a church, others running along in broken ridges, or presenting the appearance of high embattled walls, here riven into deep gullies, there opening into wild savage glens, fit spots for robber ambuscade; now presenting a fair smooth surface, now jagged, shattered, shelving, roughened with brushwood, sometimes bleached and hoary, as in the case of the pinnacled crag called the White Kirk, sometimes green with moss, or grey with lichen, sometimes, though but rarely, shaded with timber, as in the approach to the cavern called the Earl's Bower, but generally bold and naked, and sombre in tint as the colours employed by the savage Rosa. Such were the distinguishing features of the Gorge of Cliviger when Nicholas traversed it. Now the high embankments and mighty arches of a railway fill up its recesses and span its gullies. The roar of the engine is heard where the cry of the bird of prey alone resounded, and clouds of steam usurp the place on its crags. Formerly the high cliffs abounded with hawks, the rocks echoed with their yells and screeches, and the spots adjoining their nests resembled, in the words of the historian of the district, Whitaker, little charnel houses for the bones of game. Formerly, also, on some inaccessible point built the rock eagle, and reared its brood from year to year. The gaunt wolf had once ravaged the glens, and the sly fox and fierce catamountain still harboured within them. Nor were those the only objects of dread. The superstitious declared the gorge was haunted by a frightful hirsute demon, yclept Hobthurst. The general savage character of the ravine was relieved by some spots of exquisite beauty, where the traveller might have lingered with delight, if apprehension of assault from robber, or visit from Hobthurst, had not urged him on. Numberless waterfalls, gushing from fissures in the hills, coursed down their seamy sides, looking like threads of silver as they sprang from point to point. One of the most beautiful of these cascades, issuing from a gully in the rocks near the cavern called the Earl's Bower, fell in rainy seasons in one unbroken sheet of 150 feet. Through the midst of the gorge ran a swift and brawling stream, known by the appellation of the Calder, but it must not be confounded with the river flowing past Whalley Abbey. The course of this impetuous current was not always restrained within its rocky channel, and when swollen by heavy rains, it would frequently invade the narrow causeway running beside it, and spreading over the whole width of the gorge, render the road almost impassable. Through this rocky and sombre defile, and by the side of the brawling Calder, which dashed swiftly past him, Nicholas took his way. The hawks were yelling overhead, the rooks were cawing on the topmost branches of some tall timber on which they built, a raven was croaking lustily in the wood, and a pair of eagles were soaring in the still glowing sky. By and by the glen contracted, and a wall of steep rocks on either side hemmed the shuddering traveller in. Instinctively he struck spurs into his horse, and accelerated his pace. The narrow glen expands, the precipices fall further back, and the traveller breathes more freely. Still he does not relax his speed, for his imagination has been at work in the gloom, peopling his path with lurking robbers or grinning boggarts. He begins to fear he shall lose his gold, and execrates his folly for incurring such heedless risk. But it is too late now to turn back. It grows rapidly dusk, and objects become less and less distinct, assuming fantastical and fearful forms. A blasted tree, clinging to a rock and thrusting a bare branch across the road, looks to the squire like a bandit, and a white owl, bursting from a brush, scares him as if it had been Hobthurst himself. However, in spite of these and other alarms, for which he is indebted to excited fancy, he hurries on, and is proceeding at a thundering pace, when all at once his horse comes to a stop, arrested by a tall female figure, resembling that seen near the mountain cairn at the entrance of the gorge. Nicholas's blood ran cold, for though in this case he could not apprehend plunder, he was fearful of personal injury, for he believed the woman to be a witch. Mustering up courage, however, he forced Robin to proceed. If his progress was meant to be barred, a better spot for the purpose could not have been selected. A narrow road, scarcely 2 feet in width, ran round the ledge of a tremendous crag, jutting so far into the glen that it almost met the steep barrier of rocks opposite it. Between these precipitous crags dashed the river in a foaming cascade, nearly 12 feet in height, and the steep narrow causeway winding beside it, as above described, was rendered excessively slippery and dangerous from the constant cloud of spray arising from the fall. At the highest and narrowest point of the ledge, and occupying nearly the whole of its space, with an overhanging rock on one side of her and a roaring torrent on the other, stood the tall woman, determined apparently from her attitude and deportment to oppose the squire's further progress. As Nicholas advanced, he became convinced that it was the same person he had seen near the cairn, but when her features grew distinguishable, he found to his surprise that it was Nance Redferne. "Hallo, Nance!" he cried. "What are you doing here, lass, eh?" "Come to warn you, squire," she replied. "You once did me a service, and I ha' not forgotten it. That's why I watched you from the cairn cliffs, and motioned you to go back. But you didna understand my signs, or wouldna heed them, so I be come here to stay you. You're in danger, I tell you." "In danger of what, my good woman?" demanded the squire, uneasily. "Of being robbed and plundered of your gold," replied Nance. "There are 5 men waiting to set upon you, a mile further on, at the Boulder Stones." "Indeed!" exclaimed Nicholas. "They'll get little for their pains. I've no money about me." "Dunna think to deceive me, squire," rejoined Nance. "I know you have borrowed 300 pounds i' gold from young Ruchot Assheton, and as surely as you owe it under your jerkin, so surely will you lose it, if you dunna turn back, or gae on without me keeping you company." "I have no objection on earth to your company, Nance," replied the squire. "Quite the contrary. But how the devil should these rascals expect me? And, above all, how should they conjecture I should come so well provided? For, sooth to say, such is not ordinarily the case with me." "I know it right well, squire," replied Nance, with a laugh. "But I ha' received certain information of your movements." "There is only one person who could give them such information," cried Nicholas; "but I cannot, will not suspect him." "If you're thinking of Lawrence Fogg, you're na far wide o' the mark, squire,"